United States Special Envoy Steve Witkoff joins me. Nice to talk to you, sir.
Hi, Greta. How are you?
I'm very well. So, since you are the chief negotiator and sort of to take a look at what efforts were made by the United States to negotiate with Iran before we struck, can you give me an idea? Do you have any idea, or do you remember how many times you made trips overseas to meet with Iran?
Well, before the first action, Operation Midnight Hammer, I'm pretty sure that I went there 6 times, Europe and Muscat included.
And then after Operation Hammer, which was last June, about how many times did you meet with them or even speak to them on the phone?
Well, when the last round of negotiations started, Jared and I visited with them, negotiated with them 3 separate times.
In all that time, was there ever any indication they wanted to budge?
Look, they claim that that they were ready to make concessions, but there was no palpable evidence of it. In the first meeting that we had with them, they actually opened up. I mean, there was an aircraft carrier out there, but they actually opened up that they had the inalienable right to enrich. And our response was somewhat along the lines of, or President Trump views it that we have the inalienable right to stop you from enriching. And that's just how the negotiations began. Sort of a strange way for them to negotiate if they were there to make compromises and to stand behind the statements that they were only using nuclear for the greater good of their society, which is what they said to us.
Well, explain this to me, is that, as I understand it, the United States offered to, at one point, to give them free, I assume other nations have pitched in, enriched uranium to meet medical needs as well as power, which is far less than that you need for a nuclear weapon. Was that ever on the table to Iran, and did they reject that?
At the last session, Greta, we actually said to them, we'd like to see you not enriching, and we'd be prepared to give you free fuel for at least 10 years, perhaps longer, that would allow you to power and do the things that you claim you want to do on behalf of your people. And they said, you know, their response was sort of awkward. It was, we don't need you to do that for us. But of course, if you're intent on enriching, if you're intent on stockpiling, if you're intent on getting towards a weapon, then what you can't do is take fuel from somebody else, because it would come to them enriched already at a level that can never get them to a weaponized instrument. So that didn't work for them for the obvious reasons.
Well, that ought to mean, obviously, that's sort of a clue, because that's a deal of a lifetime, because they get everything they want at no price if that were indeed what they wanted. With whom were you dealing at this last meeting?
We had the foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, and his deputy at the meeting, and there was some other staff there as well.
Did you have a sense that he had any authority, or was he just sort of talking to, and then he was going to go make a phone call to the Ayatollah or somebody else? Did he seem as a foreign minister to be able to bind the country?
No, actually not. And I said it, and I think it disturbed him to say it, but I didn't say it to be disrespectful or impolite to him. I said to him, first of all, their intention was to have conversations with us indirectly. In other words, be speaking through an interlocutor who would then pass messages. And if you're there to make a deal, that's just not a format that works. We needed to. He did not have approval to talk directly to us on the telephone. Texting, maybe, but this was something that, if it was going to be settled, would have required round-the-clock activity, and we never had the sense that he had that authority. And if he had that authority, that he was prepared to exercise it. We never saw him leave the room as we set down boundaries or red lines and say, let me get a steer from someone back home. That would be something that would be very customary for me and Jared, and it was anathema for him.
Were the negotiations though cordial? I mean, sometimes you can go into negotiation and you're not going to wheel and deal, or you've got your own red line or whatever. But nonetheless, it could be quite cordial. Was the foreign minister cordial to you? Because he's mocking the United States now on Twitter. He's making fun of our gas prices.
Yeah, I had a very aggressive confrontation with him in the last session that we had. We actually started in the morning, Greta. Said to him, why don't we take a break? We'll go back to our foreign policy team, Jared and I, and we'll brief them on where we are, and we'll get a steer from them. And we came back and made a proposal, an updated proposal with regard to fuel, but also with regard to no enrichment and how long that would last, no sunset, things of that sort. And he started yelling and screaming. And I was very calm with him, as I recall. I said to him, well, maybe you'd just like me to leave and we can just call it a day. And of course he said, no. But it's hard. Look, in the first session that we had with them, he acknowledged, even boasted, that they had 460 kilograms of 60% enriched material. That 60% enriched material is roughly 1 week to 10 days away from being 90% weapons grade. That's a statistical fact. He then said, you and I both know that is roughly 11 bombs worth of material. So that's valuable. And you know we have it, and we know we have it. What are we going to do about it? That's how that session began. And that session, at some point during its course, also had another line from him where he said, we're not going to allow you to take diplomatically what you couldn't militarily. So it was him contesting the fact that we had destroyed most of Natanz, Fordow, and Esfahan, which of course we did. We destroyed almost all of it. It was complete destruction there. But I think what he was referring to is the fact that they manufacture their own nuclear equipment, which is in itself insidious and dangerous, and that he could easily reconstitute. And I actually took it as this warning. He could reconstitute, even in a small amount, and get to take himself to 90% weapons grade and pose that level of threat if he got his hands on a weapon. And it was curious to us why he would say that. He was almost warning us that he might in fact have a weapon. So when people say there was no evidence of a weapon, there actually was plenty of evidence that he was either positioning towards getting a weapon, or had a weapon already, or had a plan to get it a weapon.
It seems to me from the outside, I don't mean to oversimplify it, but that the United States put its cards on the table as to what the red line was. The no enrichment, that was the first thing, and the second was on the ballistic missiles. I mean, it seems like that was the U.S. put on the table right away. Did Iran come back and put anything like okay, we're going to, so many ballistic missiles? Did they wheel and deal and bargain at all, or was it simply no?
No, they refused to talk about the missiles. And that was a red line for us, the missiles. And you can see now why. Because the missiles, and the president has said this, and Marco has said it, as has the vice president, the missiles were used as a shield to shield what they were to defend themselves against an attack on their nuclear. Nuclear is the most existential, but the missiles are close. If you look at their destructive power and what they're doing throughout the Middle East. So it was always a red line for President Trump, and he wanted us to convey it, that missiles, offensive ballistic missiles, had to be cut back, the inventory. They just had too much and could overwhelm many of the countries in the region, and that made it existential to us.
Did he ever let his hair down and say anything personal about Prime Minister Netanyahu, the nation of Israel, or President Trump?
I mean, look, they obviously had plenty of pejorative things to say, and that's why these were tough negotiations, Greta. But our job, and Jared and I took it seriously, we're fiduciaries, and we're very loyal to to the United States of America and to the Commander-in-Chief, President Trump. And the job was to go there and to determine if, in good faith, we could get to an agreement with them, if in good faith we could have oversight protocols to make sure they were complying with the agreement based on past bad behavior, and in good faith whether they would stand by an agreement like this. And at the end of the three most recent sessions, it was our opinion that we could not answer in the affirmative on any of those questions. And I think that's how the whole policy team ended up feeling. And in particular, President Trump, who's got he's got that decision to make. That's an awesome responsibility. But I think we did our job in assessing that they were not ready to make a deal. They were not close to being able to make a deal. I'll give you one additional data point. There were many. There's 15, 20, 25 indications throughout these negotiations that they were there not in good faith. They brought with them an agreement that they had promised to give us 2 weeks before. And they wouldn't even let us take it back so we could analyze it. So they let us scan it very, very quickly. Jared and I both read it. And it was clear in that agreement that there were all kinds of ways that they were looking to circumvent the no enrichment red line that we had set forth. So, and yet they didn't want us to have the document because that would have proven in writing what their real intentions were. So this is how we saw it, and this is what we conveyed back to the president.
All right, one last quick question. I read that you're going to Israel next week. Is that on the 20-point program, or is that related to Iran, or both?
I think we have a lot of things. We haven't yet finalized the trip, but I think we have, a lot of things to discuss with the Israelis. There's obviously Iran. There's Lebanon now. We have some things to discuss with regard to finishing up the peace deal and the demilitarization of Hamas, which is a critical component. We need to bring peace to that region, and we have peace. We need to sustain that peace on behalf of everything we've done there. Everybody wants to see a final peace, and we're going to do it, and that's the president's direction.
Steve Witkoff, thank you. And I must admit, you're more patient than I am. I wouldn't be good to send over to negotiate, because I would have pulled my hair out long before, because it was a lot of hard work, a lot of trips. But thank you very much for showing up today. Thank you for doing this interview.
Thank you, Greta. Thank you.
People think news just happens. It doesn't. It happens because there's someone there to capture the moment, to explain it and share it. That's my job. I go where news breaks and give you the facts. Join me for The Record on Newsmax.